In today's video, we're going to be talking about the massive changes that were announced for the standard format starting in 2023. So let's jump into the video. First of all, thanks everybody for checking out the video. If you do enjoy what I do here, please consider hitting the like button and clicking the subscribe button. If you want to stay notified when new videos are uploaded, go ahead and click that bell icon to get notifications. But as I teased in the intro, Wizards of the Coast made a massive announcement yesterday that is quite literally changing standard format as we know it. Now, if you guys are unfamiliar with how Magic Standard works, I know some people have just recently started following the channel as I've started covering Standard and sort of talking about my journey into it as a beginner. Typically, Standard has a rotation every 2 years where the 4 oldest sets rotate out of the format to keep things fresh and diversified, both in terms of the meta and in terms of getting people to want to buy and open new product. Now, the upcoming core set Wilds of Eldraine, which is set to release later this year, would have triggered the rotation, causing 4 sets that are currently standard legal to rotate out. Those being Innistrad Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and Streets of New Capenna. Those would have rotated out, and any cards that were in them but not printed anywhere else in standard legal sets would be out of the format. However, Wizards' new announcement that they dropped yesterday has officially delayed that rotation 1 year, meaning there will be no rotation for Standard in 2023 at all, and the next one won't take place until 2024. There's a couple of different narratives to follow here, so let's tackle them one at a time, starting with why Wizards has done this. What they said is that they want to go ahead and basically revitalize the standard format. As Magic continues to grow and there's more alternate formats introduced, players have definitely shifted away from Standard, with Commander being wildly popular, but Pioneer and Modern, both in their own rights, being significantly popular formats. Still, Standard is the backbone of sort of everything is built around, and so it would make sense that they would want to restore interest in that product. Obviously, if you play just Standard and don't play other formats, the rotation is not exactly ideal because your cards will lose value, after the 2-year mark in some cases. If you do play other formats, it's really not that bad because you could either pivot to Pioneer, which is basically everything back to a specific set, and whenever something new comes out, it's legal there too. But ultimately, the idea is that if you're someone who just plays Standard or maybe wasn't interested in other formats, your cards have a relatively short shelf life in the format before they rotate out. This is going to right off the bat give them more longevity. They basically stated that players wanted to be able to use cards longer, which makes sense, and because Standard is the only format that rotates, they wanted to establish a more effective middle ground. Also, since they no longer use the block model, in which they would release a certain number of sets within a block before moving on to something different, they said it'll allow them to introduce mechanics and archetypes and build on them more effectively over time, as they have a longer window of card development for the cards that are going to be legal and will keep people engaged. And they said it'll give them stronger tools to create an environment where decks are more colors and mechanic. And the examples they referenced are the blue-white Azorius Soldiers or the green-white Celestia, I might have mispronounced that, Toxic. They wanted to have less mid-range and a bit more diversity in the pool. So what do I think of this? I think this is a great move. It definitely helps in a lot of ways. One of the biggest downsides, I think, right now is that there are some cards in the standard format that are really kind of viewed as problematic by the player base. And if not problematic, at least they've been around for so long and people really just want them to rotate out. I'm talking, of course, about cards like Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This card is an insanely good card that sees play as the core component, or one of the core components, in one of the best decks in the format, in Rakdos Midrange, which just won a Standard Pro Tour over this weekend. But Fable of the Mirror Breaker is so good that it sees a lot of play in other formats as well. This card, of course, is splashed into anything that can play it, and is a very expensive card as a result, and with this extension of Standard, Fable of the Mirror Breaker will not be going anywhere for at least another year. Now, personally, I have been playing Standard for a very short while and don't have the most expertise on it. However, I did play it in the past and did get back into it again because the format seemed really fun to me. There is a large variety of decks, and while they're not necessarily all tier 1, there is a really solid amount of options to pick up and play and do well in an event. This introduction and sort of expanding the card pool to me feels like a good move, but I am admittedly a little bit concerned. My concern being that if they don't make cards in the upcoming sets that are as good as the cards that are currently standard legal, those cards are going to largely go ignored in favor of new things. Now that comes down to card design and R&D, and hopefully they're able to like balance those things out and just keep things moving, because I don't think the solution is to necessarily power creep a card like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but maybe to give some decks more tools to go up against the stronger decks. However, there is another option, and that would be a ban list. In the past 6 to 10 years, there have not been a crazy amount of bans for Standard. A lot of other cards in other formats have seen bans, but for the most part, Standard has been pretty balanced in its design. That's not to say cards haven't been banned. Of course, Emrakul, the Promised End, perhaps one of the most infamous ones. Smuggler's Copter, another extremely good card. And even going a bit more recently, we had bans for Meathook Massacre and Fires of Invention in 2020 and 2022, respectively. So they are not afraid to ban cards in Standard as needed, but I definitely think it might be important to introduce a bit more routine Standard ban list. Whether that is just addressing problem cards as they come up, or even introducing somewhat of a limited mechanic, I certainly think if Fable of the Mirror Breaker was a 1 of instead of a 4 of in Standard decks, they would have to find other things to play, and it would definitely be interesting to see what that might do. And the good news is Wizards said this is not going to be the end. They're not just delaying the rotation and doing it there. They basically said they're going to be rolling out a multi-step plan to support and revitalize Standard play, specifically for tabletops, and that it is currently in the planning stages. We will see some of these changes come to MTG Arena as well, and the Alchemy format, which runs alongside it, is likely going to see a couple of changes, but I know the rotation for that will mostly be staying the same. This is a huge thing because of the fact that it is going to drastically change the way people collect, the way people deck build, and the values of cards. Cards like Fable of the Mirror Breaker have been selling extremely high on TCG Player over the past couple of days since this announcement, because people thought they were going to have to offload it pretty soon come September, and now it turns out you've got at least another year and a half to play with the card, pending potential ban list hits. When I did some of my videos talking about the Standard Series decks that were basically at the top, mentioned a lot of things rotating out and what changes that might necessitate in those builds, and I'm going to have to make some updated versions of those, I think, because we're not going to see a Standard rotation in the same way, which means some cards that were looked at as decent replacements may not even be worth playing at all when you consider the fact that the better original version is still going to be accessible. So this is a huge change for Standard, and there will certainly be more to cover as we go forward, and no more information. Right now, all we know is the delay, and while I think it's good, it definitely opens up a lot of different paths with questions that hopefully Wizards will be able to answer. My question now is, what do you guys think? Do you think we're going to get a ban list update more consistently? They might address some of the problem cards? Do you think perhaps they'll implement some kind of limitations or bring back a core set of sorts where you can sort of introduce other staples into the format without messing with the formula of things? There are obviously a ton of questions that still need answered, and I, for one, am looking forward to seeing what answers we get. But that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.